Imagine paying for an ordinary dinner and discovering years later that this meal became the most expensive in human history. We're not talking about a luxury restaurant, not a famous chef, not an exclusive experience. We're talking about two pizzas. This is the real story of the man who spent 10,000 bitcoins in a single night and turned a simple order into one of the greatest symbols of financial regret in the digital age. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the year 2010. At that time, Bitcoin was still an internet curiosity. There were no popular exchanges, no headlines, and certainly no crypto millionaires. Bitcoin had no defined price. It wasn't accepted in stores. And for most people, it was nothing more than an experiment with no real value. Among the few enthusiasts back then was Laszlo Hanyecz, a programmer who actively participated in online forums dedicated to Bitcoin. He believed in the idea, but he didn't see it as an investment. To him, Bitcoin was simply an interesting technology. In May 2010, Laszlo made a simple post on a forum. He wrote that he was willing to pay 10,000 Bitcoins to anyone who could deliver 2 large pizzas to him. There was no irony, no joke. It was a sincere request. At that moment, 10,000 Bitcoins were worth about $40, the equivalent of a cheap dinner. Nothing more. A few days later, another user accepted the offer. He bought 2 pizzas from a local pizzeria and had them delivered to Laszlo's home. The payment was made. The pizzas arrived. The deal was completed. No ceremony, no official records, no idea of what it would represent in the future. At that moment, something historic happened. For the first time, Bitcoin was used to buy a real physical product. That transaction marked the beginning of Bitcoin's practical use as money, but no one realized it at the time. Time passed. Bitcoin slowly began to gain attention, at first gradually, then at an accelerated pace. Years later, when Bitcoin's value started rising significantly, that seemingly insignificant transaction took on a new meaning. Those 2 pizzas didn't cost $40. They cost millions. As time went on, the calculations became more painful. 10,000 Bitcoins reached values in the tens of millions of dollars. At certain points, more than 300 million. That simple dinner turned into the most expensive meal in human history. But here's the most important detail. Laszlo didn't make a mistake in the traditional sense. He wasn't deceived. He didn't act irresponsibly. In that context, the trade made sense. Bitcoin needed to prove it could function as money. Someone had to use it. Someone had to take the first step. And that's exactly what Laszlo did. Without knowing it, he helped create the world we live in today. A world where cryptocurrencies are traded globally, debated by governments, and followed by investors across the planet. Even so, the psychological weight of the story is impossible to ignore. It's hard not to ask, what if he had waited? What if he had kept those Bitcoins? But that question only exists because the future already happened. On that day in 2010, no one knew what Bitcoin would become. No one could predict what was coming. Years later, Laszlo publicly stated that he has no regrets. He says his intention was never to get rich, but to experiment with the technology. Still, his story became a powerful symbol, a harsh reminder of how seemingly small decisions can grow into something enormous over time. Today, the date of that purchase is remembered as Bitcoin Pizza Day. Every year, the community recalls the event, not as a joke, but as a historical milestone. The pizzas are gone. They were eaten, forgotten, but the decision remains forever recorded on the blockchain, immutable, eternal. The story of the 10,000 Bitcoin pizza is not about mistake. It's about timing, about risk, and about how the value of things is only revealed after time passes. Because in the end, all of us have made choices that felt right at the moment, but years later, carry a completely different weight. And the final question is simple and uncomfortable. How many decisions have you made in life without imagining how much they could be worth in the future?